Let's jump right in. We all know the manufacturing of pulp and paper products is notoriously energy intensive. You're dealing with massive amounts of power for material processing, steam generation, and operating some seriously heavy machinery. And with that enormous energy footprint comes significant greenhouse gas emissions. In today's landscape, effectively tracking and disclosing those emissions isn't just a best practice anymore, it is an absolute market necessity. So, in today's explainer, we're going to decode the SASB standards RRPP 1010A.1 and 1010A.2. We'll look at exactly how the market standardizes greenhouse gas reporting and target disclosures so you're fully prepared.
Here is our agenda for the step-by-step journey we are taking today. 1. The Scope 1 challenge. 2. Calculating gross emissions. 3. Aligning the boundary. 4. Target setting and strategy. And finally, 5. Tracking performance. Starting off with Section 1, the Scope 1 challenge.
The standard specifically highlights that direct emissions in this sector come largely from the combustion of fossil fuels and biomass in stationary and mobile engines, cogeneration boilers, and other processing equipment. Now, pulp and paper mills use significant amounts of carbon-neutral biomass alongside traditional fossil fuels. But here is what's fascinating. Effectively managing these emissions is not just a regulatory compliance exercise. When you optimize those massive cogeneration boilers, you aren't just mitigating risk in an evolving climate policy landscape, you are directly improving your baseline operating efficiency. Bottom line, saving carbon essentially means saving money. Moving right along to Section 2, calculating gross global emissions. 7, it's a crucial number to remember here. When we talk about greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide usually steals the spotlight, right? But the SASB standard specifically requires tracking 7 distinct greenhouse gases covered under the Kyoto Protocol. You've got a whole hidden group of offenders to account for. You have to explicitly calculate and consolidate emissions for carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, and nitrogen trifluoride. Yeah, it sounds a bit like cramming for a college chemistry exam, but it perfectly underscores exactly why this standardization is so vital for clarity across the industry. Ensuring your compliance scope explicitly captures all 7 of these gases is step 1 to making sure your data is totally audit-ready. The key word you really need to focus on here is gross. We are calculating gross global Scope 1 emissions. This means strictly raw, unadjusted emissions pumped directly into the atmosphere. This is usually where companies try to get a little clever by applying carbon offsets or renewable energy credits early in their math to make the numbers look better. But SASB shuts that down immediately. You absolutely cannot use compensatory mechanisms in this initial gross calculation. It has to be the raw, unvarnished data. If you're building this into an actual functional workflow, it takes 3 exact steps. First, you identify the direct emissions of those 7 gases we just talked about. Second, you apply the 100-year time horizon global warming potential, or GWP values. And the golden rule here is that you must use the values from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, specifically their 5th assessment report from 2014. Finally, step 3, you consolidate all of that math into a single unified metric, metric tons of CO2 equivalent, or CO2e. So how exactly do you run those calculations? Well, the 2004 WRI/WBCSD GHG Protocol serves as your foundational base reference. But here is a rare instance of relief in a strict standard. It actually lets you use the local tools you're probably already familiar with. You're allowed to use specific regional or industry guidance, like the EPA Stationary Combustion Guidance, ISO standards, or the India GHG Inventory Program. As long as those local methodologies conform back to the base GHG protocol, you are completely in the clear. Now for Section 3, aligning the boundary. You have to consolidate your greenhouse gas emissions data using the exact same approach you use for your financial reporting data, which generally aligns with the GHG Protocol's financial control approach. Think of it like this. If your corporate wallet is open and paying for it, your carbon ledger has to account for it. It is vital that your emissions reporting boundary perfectly mirrors your financial boundary. This stops organizations from cherry-picking their most efficient facilities to make emissions look artificially better, and it maintains absolute transparency. Section 4, Target Setting and Strategy. Mandate RRPP-110A.2 dictates the disclosure of your strategic emission reduction plans, and you must clearly delineate your target structure. Are you aiming for an absolute target, meaning a hard reduction in total emissions regardless of your production volume? Or are you aiming for an intensity-based target, which measures emissions relative to your business output, like emissions per air-dried metric ton of paper? If you choose that intensity-based target, providing the metric denominator is mandatory. This rule is absolutely key to preventing companies from hiding behind vague efficiency claims without providing any hard proof. The standard outlines a mandatory no-excuses checklist for compliance. You need to disclose the scope, meaning what percentage of your total emissions does this target actually apply to. You need a clearly defined base year for comparison, a target year for your finish line, the specific reduction percentage you are aiming for, and finally, the actual mechanisms you are going to use to get there. Skipping any one of these elements turns a serious strategy into a corporate daydream, and that simply doesn't fly under these standards. And lastly, Section 5, Tracking Performance and Recalculations. Setting the target is really only half the battle. Your disclosure needs to provide the real-world context driving your reduction mechanisms. You've got to discuss the actual activities and investments required to hit your targets, along with any risks or limiting factors. You also need to detail if the strategy applies differently across various business units or geographies. And crucially, you need to explain how your targets tie into regional cap-and-trade regulations, like the EU Emissions Trading Scheme or the California Cap-and-Trade Program. This is exactly where local operational decisions collide with global climate economics. Plus, if there are any circumstances where your base year emissions had to be retrospectively recalculated, you've got to document that here too. This rule acts as a strict bouncer against greenwashing. Your forward-looking strategy disclosure only applies to tangible, ongoing, or completed activities during this specific reporting cycle. If a new technology or carbon reduction strategy is just a vague whiteboard idea slated for 2035, it doesn't get past the velvet rope into this year's disclosure. Basically, if it wasn't active or completed during the reporting period, it does not belong here. Ultimately, treating these SASB disclosures not just as a rigid compliance checklist, but as a strategic audit, prepares your organization to actually thrive in a carbon-conscious market. It forces rigorous data hygiene, deep strategic alignment between your finance and operations teams, and exactly the kind of transparency that investors increasingly demand today. So, taking a close look at your current data collection and reporting boundaries, are your Scope 1 reduction mechanisms truly ready for the next audit?